The Boyo Wars wage on. After a successful showing at Brickworld Chicago, our hero fell ill to COVID. Now he is back to reclaim Kamino. What techniques will he have in store for us this week?
Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back with another video, and this is going to be episode 4 of building Kamino in Lego. I know that it's been quite a while since I've done one of these episodes. I mentioned in my update video how life has just been a little bit hectic lately with me traveling for conventions or getting sick with COVID and missing conventions, as well as some secret stuff that I can't quite reveal to you right now, but once it comes up, it'll be super exciting to show you guys. But we are back with Kamino. I'm super excited to be finally getting back into kind of what I'm known for, which is doing these big mock updates. So unfortunately, this isn't going to be one of those updates that it's like massive in scale. I do think I built some pretty cool things, and I think that in terms of updates, this one will be very informative. But this, like, build-wise, isn't going to be like, I guess, equal or equivalent to the amount of time that I took off. You know, it's not like while I was away from doing these updates, I was continuously working on Kamino. Things came up, but I think this will still be a very serviceable update. The main thing that we really worked on this week were just the panels on the top of the dome, and I think that once you see some of the details that I put into it, as well as some of the unique pieces that I use, you guys are going to be really happy with it, and I think that this will actually help a lot of people with getting, I guess, the most out of their build. So enough of being vague about it. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the build. So as I mentioned earlier, if we were going to go with light bluish gray for the Kamino domes as like the primary color, we're going to have to figure out a way to represent some of the lighter streaks that we would have for the Kamino domes, you know, just to give it that extra level of detail. I think probably the most straightforward approach would be going with something like white. I particularly don't like using white in this scenario just because the streaks on the domes, you know, aren't that bright. The Lego white's a very bright color, and I just didn't really think it would fit to use something like this for the dome. So this would obviously be a super readily available piece in color, like, you know, everything comes in the Lego white color, but I don't think that was ideal for this situation. Another thing that we could have considered was going with the old gray, or just, you know, light gray, as most people would call it. And this is definitely an option. The only thing for me is that it just doesn't really pop as being much lighter than, you know, the light bluish gray. In fact, I think when you compare the two, I'd say that this appears lighter than this. So I think if it were possible to go with, you know, the light gray as the base color and then kind of accentuate it with this, that would maybe work. But I still don't think this works as like a good representation of the lighter color streaks that we see kind of represented as details on the Kamino domes. So next up, we have another option. It's kind of a rare Lego color. A lot of you might not have even heard of it before or seen it before, but we have what's called very light gray, which is actually a super cool color. This is something that's pretty rare. It doesn't come in a ton of sets. But it does exist, which means that, you know, we can find it. If we can find enough of it, we can use it. Here I just have a stack of like 1x1 very light gray plates, and you can see they actually contrast quite nicely with the light bluish gray here. Like, you can tell that is very obviously, you know, a lighter shade of gray, even, you know, compared with the standard just light gray. This is definitely a very good option. The only problem with using very light gray was there's not a ton of options when it comes to pieces in this color. In fact, the most useful piece that I could find in this color for this application were these 1x1 plates. And these things are not cheap. So, you know, if I just had unlimited money and there were an unlimited supply of these things, I could just buy a bunch and stack them all together and get all of the lighter details that I needed, and we'd be good to go. However, that's just not possible. I don't have nearly enough money for this mock to be able to represent all the long lines that go across the Kamino domes, to do it all with 1x1 plates stacked up against each other. So while we can use this as maybe an accent color, this isn't really going to work as our long-term solution to having, you know, long colored line or brightly colored lines that are contrasting nicely with the light bluish gray here. So that brings us to our next option, another color that is quite rare, probably even more rare than the very light gray, but we have what's called very light bluish gray. I think when you look at this from afar, it does kind of look like the Lego white color, but it's not. In fact, I can even compare the white with it here. You can see the white is considerably brighter than the very light bluish gray. But the very light bluish gray is also considerably brighter than the light bluish gray, which is awesome. Now, if you're wondering why I exclusively have Technic pieces here, these Technic lift arms, well, that's because much like the very light gray, there isn't a ton of options for very light bluish gray. Like there's not like plates or bricks that I could use in this color. There's a few listings that say they have plates in this color, but I'm not even sure if those are legit, and if they are, they're definitely not going to have the quantities that I need. But because these are such large pieces, you know, if I wanted to have a long line, this is something I could definitely work with. And, you know, it's not super expensive. These aren't cheap pieces, but they're not super expensive. And because they're so big, you know, I could reasonably acquire a good amount of these in order to, you know, represent those long lines that I'm looking for. And they also come in a bunch of different sizes. Like I have varying sizes of Technic lift arms here, and I think that this is definitely going to be the way to go. But of course, with using Technic lift arms and trying to integrate them into these panels that I'm doing, it's going to require a lot more design work than if I was just, you know, stacking plates on top of it. This is going to be considerably more difficult to integrate. However, the money trade-off and the availability trade-off is definitely going to make it well worth it to try to figure this out. If we can, you know, integrate this into the build convincingly, I think it's really going to pop. It's going to be a very unique looking build because you don't really see these colors, you know, integrated with these colors over here, especially when it comes to Star Wars builds. So I'm quite excited to see how this turns out. So let's go ahead and check out some prototypes. Now here I have two prototypes for some panels that I could potentially use on the Kamino domes. I have to give a shout out to my good friends Trevor and Caleb for working very strenuously on these. Like they put quite a bit of time into both of these prototypes. Unfortunately, I don't have the complete version of this panel right here. It was supposed to have a little section that was built up here, and there would basically just be like a zigzagging line that would come across this way. But the chunk here just got destroyed on the way back from the convention, and I'm guessing I've used the pieces that were there because I was trying to see if I could throw it back together, but that just wasn't going to happen for this video. But I did want to show these off because these guys spent such a good amount of time working on this, and this was a great source of inspiration for me when it came to, you know, trying to figure out, you know, what kind of panel designs that I want to go with. And I think, you know, for starters, this is just a great look at how the lift arms can be integrated into these flat panels in order to give you just a really nice looking design, and also have that contrast between the light bluish gray and the very light bluish gray that we're using here. And you can even see in some areas we did still use the very light gray. Those are the plates that are right there. And then there's also some old gray, some old light gray for discoloration, like this piece right here. And I think all of these, when used the right way, can come together to make a very, I want to say natural. There's nothing really natural about this because this is like a man-made surface, but it helps to make natural looking weathering, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's one of the things that is going to make the dome on Kamino look so just visually impressive. You know, it's not just going to be a flat gray slab or even like a curved gray slab, but instead there's going to be these surface details, these patterns, this weathering and color and discoloration that will all come together and just make it look really cool. So shout out to them for getting these together. This one is in much better condition, and I do quite like this design. I think the only reservation I kind of had with this, especially when I started lining these up on the panels, was while there is, you know, a lot of detail in this, when it comes to these panels, I think there is a such thing as too much detail, especially when you start kind of having them too close together. When you're looking at Kamino, there is certainly surface details, but it's not, I guess, an overwhelming amount of surface details to the point where you're like, oh yeah, there's just kind of stuff and and things going on everywhere. And I know that's not very descriptive, but I did want to strike a nice balance. So while I do like both of these prototypes, and I certainly use techniques from both of them, I did kind of decide I didn't want to go with, I guess, an excessive amount of detail, so to speak. So, while Trevor and Caleb were super excited to get to try a bunch of different techniques on both of these, I think that it's better used to kind of, spread apart maybe some of the individual details on these across multiple panels, as opposed to maybe loading a bunch of them up on one panel. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the panels that I constructed to go on the Kamino Dome. And here we have some of the completed Kamino panels. These were super fun, some of them quite tedious, but altogether super fun to go ahead and build. There's 3 basic sections of it, and I've mentioned this before, but I guess it's worth mentioning again. These gaps here aren't intentional. Those are going to be filled in by some greebling sections that'll go all the way around the dome. So I left that open for now, but I guess we can go ahead and start from the bottommost section, and here you can really just see how powerful those very light bluish gray lift arms are. Along the top section here, the trim of these sections, there's a very thick line of very light bluish gray on the actual Kamino dome. So being able to have these lift arms and basically just attach them to the tops of these and have them somewhat angled really just worked wonders for getting the exact kind of detail that I wanted here. And I've even also been able to include, a stripe going down the side right there. So that all actually worked out quite well. You can see that in terms of detail for these 3 down here, I didn't do too much. I added a little bit of weathering, like in here. I used some dark tan as well as some olive green, and both of those colors are really good accent colors for weathering for these little panels right here when contrasting them with a light bluish gray. I'm so trying so hard to make sure when I'm referring to any of these gray colors, I'm using the right color, because there's so many different grays we're using in this mock. We have very light bluish gray, very light gray. We have light bluish gray, and then, in some places we have light gray. And you can also see, like I just said, we have the very light bluish gray, obviously the trim out there, but also I'm using some of those very light gray plates as just a good bit of weathering, which actually works out because, for the bigger sections, the very light bluish gray is obviously the way to go. But if I just want to have a little block somewhere in here, I can't really use a lift arm for that in a way that's not extremely wasteful. So these little plates right here actually serve that purpose very well. It's nice to have some utility with those guys as well. So moving up to this middle section of panels right here, the room is so bright right now, so I'm trying to show, right here, for example, we have some weathering with some light gray as opposed to light bluish gray. There's some plates in here that are just representing a bit of weathering. It's kind of hard to tell just because of how bright the room is. I think this is actually probably a better angle, but it's good. It's subtle, which is kind of what I like. I don't, want these kind of big, ugly blobs of discolored Lego kind of just sitting in the middle here. When it's subtle there, I think it works a lot better as, a weathering type of deal, as opposed to just, oh, I didn't pay attention and put light gray instead of light bluish gray. So I think that actually worked out quite well. I have to say this panel is for sure the one I'm most proud of. I was able to get this very cool looking zigzagging line in there. And this is actually accurate. That's something that you see on the panels in Kamino, and it's just so satisfying. One thing I do need to fix with this one is I have this just line of brackets here that are all in all the wrong colors. I need to order some more in light bluish gray, but that'll happen. That'll get fixed along the way. This panel right here is rocking some similar details. It does have a long, streaking, very light bluish gray grouping of lift arms there. And you can see I use some very light gray as kind of just accent colors around it. And looks pretty cool when you line them all up together. I think once I had these two next to each other, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of detail. And I got here, and I was thinking, oh, I should just continue with my reference material, because pretty much these two sections are right next to each other on the models they built for Kamino. And I got to this one, I was like, you know what, let me actually just do a more basic one, because I don't want to just have a bunch of super detailed sections next to each other. And also, I don't have reference material that'll be able to cover up, the top of this dome as well as the top of the second half dome I'm going to do perfectly. So I'm going to have to use some reference material and do things exact, kind of like these two panels. I'm also going to have to do some filler panels, so to speak, that are either going to be very simplified or just things that I came up with all on my own. So those are things I'm having to consider when working on this. And then finally, just to show you the top, this is the smallest of the paneling sections. I didn't do too much here. I did have the black lines, which it is accurate, and I think it actually looks quite good. We have a thinner, brighter line here. This is not the very light bluish gray. This is just the very light gray. So another use of those plates right there. And then here we have some like weathering discoloration with the light gray, and there's like a light gray panel there, some olive green in there as well, some dark grays, some very light grays, and I think probably the coolest part about this top section up here is this little cutout right there. It's just small little details like you can add to the panels on this dome. And like I threw together the prototype panels, not the prototype panels, the temporary panels pretty quickly, but that would have worked for I think a lot of people, but I really wanted to have that next level of detail when it came to Kamino. So actually putting the effort into this, looking at reference material, is really going to go a long way in making the surface of this dome just look that much more detailed. I'm super excited to see how this ends up turning out. So unfortunately, that's all I got for you guys this week. Oh, one more thing. I will say it is so cool being able to have an actual Kaminoan on the Kamino MOC. Shout out to LEGO. I'm convinced that we have some boyos on the inside who are looking out for me and putting out these minifigures at very timely opportunities so we can have as accurate as MOCs as possible. So that's really cool. But yeah, in terms of the build, this is all I got for you guys this week. But I hope that this was a pretty cool insight into ways that you can even accentuate your builds. If you're doing something that is mostly light bluish gray, you can spice it up with some very light bluish gray. You can get some very light gray plates. You can use, old grays, olive greens, dark tans. All those things can go a long way in transporting what could just be a very basic panel like you saw with what I took to the conventions, and really just transforming it into something that looks quite detailed and very visually impressive. So let's go ahead and move to the outro of the video, guys. And that's going to finish up this week's Kamino update. I hope you guys enjoyed checking it out once again. Like I said earlier, it feels great to be back in the swing of things, back with these Kamino updates. And since all my travel plans are pretty much done for the foreseeable future, at the very least, you guys can expect to see far more regular Kamino updates. I have some super exciting plans for this build, and I'm ready to just keep putting them out there. I think being forced to kind of sit back and look at the convention and seeing all the awesome things that people brought to the convention just made me really realize I need to get back on my grind. I need to get back to regularly putting out builds and just content, and I'm just ready to just really dive deeply into my channel and into my builds at this point. So hope you guys are just as excited about it as I am, and I don't really have much else to say. So of course, let me know in the comment section below what you're thinking about Kamino so far, and please let me know if the techniques that I talked about here in regards to the different colors you can use that are kind of outside of the box with the very light gray and the very light bluish gray. Let me know if that's something that you guys actually find beneficial, and I'd love to see more people integrating these more unique or niche colors into their builds to really just, have something look a little bit more interesting than just a flat slab of gray with maybe some dark gray details in there. So really excited to see kind of what people can do with this, and hopefully it's helpful. So that's all I got for you guys this week. If you like what I do, go ahead and support the video by hitting the like button, support the channel by smashing that subscribe button, and I'll be back again very soon.